Because a coffee plant is 60 to 100 years old. Like, that's the life of a coffee plant. So if a 100-year-old coffee plant is there, it's definitely come through 3 generations. Which means you have 2 brewing methods in buying one cloth reusable cold brew bag and a V60 bag. And then you can get paper filters in 500 rupees and figure out whether you want a paper filter based brew or a cloth filter based brew.
Can you tell us the entire process of how it goes from a bean to your kitchen?
Now is when blossoms happen, rains happen, and so there will be flowers. Once flowers are there, it takes about 14 days for the flowers to develop into fruit, and then it takes around 9 to 11 months for the fruit to fully ripen.
When you crave a coffee, you're actually craving the caffeine itself, right?
Not necessarily, it's the taste also. You're just used to a taste. Like, if you're used to a Coca-Cola, you want a soda, you'll drink Coca-Cola, but there's a lot of sugar to it. What do? You go for a Coke Zero, you would go for a Diet Coke. The beans that I was talking about have gone through 4.5 months of slow fermentation afterwards. So that means it's not just 12 months of love, it's 18 months of love. It was 15 days of soaking and 4.5 months of slow drying, which also meant there was fermentation going on with the moisture level that was still there in the beans.
Do you think coffee is a rich man's beverage?
It is priced expensively, but that's not the only reason why it's rich man's beverage.
But if you are like a normal instant coffee drinker, how do you actually transition into that world? What should be your next step? Like, if you were to talk to a new person who just wants to try, is curious about different flavors, different types of roasting also, the size of the granule, how do you actually tell them, try this first, then you can transition to the next step to just make it a more memorable journey for them also?
We think that it should be easy for people to try drinking coffee. So we've started with 50 gram packs. We wanted people to be able to try it in different grind sizes.
Hi, thank you so much for tuning into the Non-Expert. Today I'm so happy because we are going to talk about my favorite thing in the world, which is coffee. It makes me so happy to see new brands coming up in Indian market and trusting us with all these experiments, new flavors, new way to serve the coffee, new packaging. So it's an exciting time to be alive. And today I have Bhavika, who is a founder of one of such interesting brands, Caffinary. She is called as Caffinary, as the name suggests. And she's going to talk to us about the coffee culture in India, it has evolved, and specifically about her brand. So please help me welcome Bhavika. Hi. Thank you for
Hi.
coming here. I know it was a long journey for you in the afternoon. How was it, the journey?
Oh, it's always a pleasure to come to Thane because it's just beautiful, spacious places. Thankfully, the traffic on Sundays is not too much. So I'm
I was doing a research for this podcast and coffee consumption parameters and everything. India is such a hot country. It has hot weather, like in all seasons. Still, Indian consumers prefer hot coffee over cold coffee. So that's very interesting for me because, cold coffee should be the first alternative considering we live in almost 40 degrees, right? But we always prefer hot. Why is that? What do you think is the reason for that?
I think it's a wake me up beverage a lot of times, more than just something to sip on when it starts. If you're thinking about the first beverage as coffee that people had, it was probably a frappuccino that people liked. So if that was when the culture of coffee was to something to sip on the side or as a snack. But if you look at major Indian consumption every day in the morning, we Indians need the first cup to be hot, be it coffee, be it we have the culture of hot water with apple cider vinegar and lemon. We have the culture of drinking coffee, piping hot. Anything that is a wake you up kind of a drink is needs to be sort of hot, but not necessarily. I question this a lot of times, but I've found that yeah, wake me up has to be a little warm. And Vinayak, my co-founder, I discussed the same thing with him a couple days back, and I asked him why. He said we come from a place of privilege where we wake up from ACs and we feel like we need something warm to change that and to warm us up, which makes us feel like having a hot beverage. If we were waking up in an uncomfortable position, we might just rush to having loads and loads of cold water instead.
Do you think coffee is a rich man's beverage?
It used to be. I mean, it is priced expensively. That's not the only reason why it's rich man's beverage. It is also something that was available in the southern part of India, and the availability of chai was more throughout India because the British were drinking it for the longest time across the country. So the logistics were all figured out, and it's a lightweight product. What also makes coffee more expensive is tea has a component of water and milk together. Coffee has pure milk, which makes it more expensive. It's not just the coffee that's expensive, one cup of coffee that's expensive, it's also the milk component that makes it more expensive. And if it was black coffee that was being consumed, we'd probably be in the ballparks of similar price
Price
ranges.
range, right? But today, like I drink black coffee when I'm working out, but later in the day I would have a latte. Like that's like a usual choice for most people I've seen. So yeah, black coffee is one of the biggest choices that people are making now, and I can feel the shift. Even in my office, people prefer drinking black coffee because when the milk turns colder, it kind of destroys the taste of that coffee, right?
I mean, hot coffee also masks a lot of the bitterness a lot of people have observed. We were having a meetup yesterday and we were discussing why is it that we drink such piping hot coffee, piping hot milk, while the real flavor notes of coffee are best experienced at 50 to 65 degrees Celsius. And if you go to a Blue Tokai today, you'll see that they'll serve it to you at that temperature, and they write it as disclaimers that this is what our temperature will be, so our coffee's temperature would be, and if you want it to be hotter, you can request for it to be so. But we don't recommend it. Uh, the reason for that is that you will be able to taste the coffee itself a lot more. But like I said, we want our beverages to be probably wake us up, or to pick us up, or to motivate us.
Also, like in India, sugar is also consumed with chai or coffee. So I think that kind of also like sugar is much more stronger than the coffee's flavors itself when people are drinking. Especially if you go for this typical filter coffee, it has a lot of sugar component in it. So when we drink other coffees, like if you go to Blue Tokai or something, they don't add sugar. So that's also the bitterness is much more felt by the consumers.
I think this is a larger discussion on what the journey of the consumer is in terms of coffee. I think everyone of us at some point starts from an instant coffee that was given to us in a frothy form in hot or cold format, and it was probably as a guest that it was served to you. You want a chai or coffee? Let's see, or we were passing by a Starbucks or we were passing by a Costa and we said, you know what, this smells good. Let's try it out. That's the journey of introduction of coffee.
What was the first coffee that you had?
I think my aunt had served me a frothy cold coffee, and I used to think froth is not really nice. And then my cousin said, there are different levels of judgment that come in, but they were like, oh no, the froth's the best part. And I said, okay, let me try that. And then, yeah, I was like, yeah, no, this is what I like. So, frothy coffee is something that could be an introducer to a lot of people. But more memorably, I think when I really started liking coffee was when I had filter coffee and I said, oh, this is great, just as well. So, at some point in time, I used to froth up milk and make it for my hostel mates. I used to say, just let's have something together at 11 in the night at night. And there were times when I used to give my partner coffee and tell him, you know what, 11 o'clock, you want a cup of coffee? Yeah. And that's when I did not know that it wakes you up. Littlest of things just build up to a lot in terms of the journey, and each step is important. You learn eventually what comes out. So if you're talking about sugar and black coffee being part of your journey, then it's come into the culture through different routes. The utility is different, the use case is different, and the taste exposure is different. What you like versus what you don't like can be changed in a lot of different ways. Now, the reason why you find a coffee bitter could be because maybe it's not been brewed well. Maybe it's not the right coffee that comes into your hand. So curation, in my opinion, is one of the most important things when it comes to giving the right coffee in the right hands. We have a cafe in Kochi where people used to walk up to me and say, give me the most bitter coffee that it is that you can give to me, because that's what I want. They're not saying they want the utility to be to wake them up, They want the bitterness in their coffee, and that's the culture, because Kerala and Wayanad, if you know the different regions of the country where coffee is grown, Wayanad is the one region which is very famous for their robustas. Wayanad robustas are GI tagged, and that's the only robusta in the country that is geographical index tagged. So, uh, the major chunk of supply that happens within Kerala happens of robusta coffee. So they're used to that taste. Now they would not think of adding sugar to that coffee. It's an exposure, it's a journey, it's how you like your coffee. I have been in Bangalore, I have been in Kochi, and I have lived in the northern parts of India. And the cultures in which coffee is consumed is vastly different. The acceptability of a bitter cup of coffee, which we would call bitter, is something that it's much more acceptable in the southern part of India. Like there are so many more cups of black coffee that are asked for in the southern part of India than in the northern part of India. And not so much in Bangalore, because Bangalore is more cosmopolitan and metro, and it has so much of us living there. So many of us living there that my exposure was more amongst people like ourselves. So there you don't find this as much. Of course, Bangalore cultures are changing. It's the closest to the coffee growing regions of the country. So extremely fancy cultures that are coming around, but where you wouldn't expect fancy, it still is. Again, coming back to your question of whether sugar and milk are important components of the coffee and how it impacts our tastes and what we order. If we have to change the way we order, we'll have to go through that instant coffee to the coffee in a cafe and say, you know what, this doesn't taste the very same, and I want this difference. And then trying different things and finding out what you like. And for that, the community culture is really helping our country, I feel. Long way to go.
I love, community tasting for coffees. They brew fresh coffee and you don't know something and someone will tell you, you have to smell it this way. It gives you better notes. So all these things are part of education. That is coming up at least in the city centers. That's what I've observed in last few years. And I've been to a few events like Blue Tokais when I actually learned first how to brew a coffee from the bean to the drink part. I never knew that because before that I only drank instant coffee, you know and the data that I was studying, it was a Coffee Board of India publication. They mentioned that 90% people are still drinking instant coffee, and it has also a component of chicory. So, can you talk to us about that? What is a chicory, and why is it an acceptable component in coffee in India?
So Nalini Menon is somebody who's considered the first woman in coffee in India. And she, in her words, I'd like to quote her, and she says, "Chicory is addictive. You cannot get rid of it. It is something that's ingrained in the culture of the country." It came out as part of World War II that there was lack of coffee, there were shortages of coffee for which a filler was needed. Now, that filler isn't something that's bad. It's as common as a ginseng would be, and it's considered to be good for the heart. However, it's not coffee and it tastes different. So, if you're looking for coffee and caffeine, then you wouldn't want to add chicory to your coffee. Plus, it's definitely comparatively inexpensive. Inflation has hit both coffee and chicory. I wouldn't say chicory has maintained its prices, but it continues to have a significant price difference, because of which it's the one that is looked down upon. India is the kind of country which will label something on the price tag. And there are people who drink just chicory as well. Yes, it is not consumed in India. It's consumed in the US. If there is a green coffee culture that's going on in some subcultures, some corners, there is a chicory drinking culture going on in some other corners where people say caffeine's bad for you.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
So there are caffeine detox that we all need to take at some point or the other, where we are like, we are not
So,
drinking
the
coffee for a
decaf
month.
that they serve, what is it exactly?
Decaf goes through a process where the caffeine is removed for people like people who want to drink coffee after a certain point in time. You don't want your hormones to be on a high at all points in time, but you also want to drink coffee. That is the kind of reason where decaf enters. So we were having this discussion again in the meetup yesterday, that I have a 2 p.m. cutoff. I don't. I mean, somebody mentioned this that they have a 2 p.m. cutoff for caffeine. And what do I do when I want a coffee at 5 p.m. in the evening? I need a cup of coffee. I really crave a cup of
So
coffee.
when you crave a coffee, you're actually craving the caffeine itself, right?
Not necessarily. It's the taste also. You're just used to a taste. Like if you're used to a Coca Cola, you want a soda, you'll drink Coca Cola, but there's a lot of sugar to it. What do? You go for a Coke Zero, you would go for a Diet Coke. It's the taste that you're just used to. If you go for a chai or a lemon soda, if you go for a sugar craving, for example, that sugar craving could also come from a place of habit that I drink a cold beverage every evening, and cold has some flavor. It's not just water. It's like thirst or hunger, and you have to. That craving needs to be quenched or satiated in one form or the other.
So decaf helps you still with that, but you get the taste. That's why it's becoming popular now.
Yes.
So let me actually take you back to thoda history of coffee in India. It's not native to India, right? It entered in 17th century. So I read this very interesting story of this person coming and smuggling coffee beans. Is it true?
I'll have to go back in time. Let's do time travel. But there are a lot of different stories which says it's coming from a sock, from the bed, from a stick, walking stick, different regions. So it could be Ethiopian. There are different regions, different countries, and different stories that come up. But 7 beans is what it's said that Kaldi brought along with him, and those 7 beans were then planted in the Baba Budangiri region because Baba Budan was the one who brought it. Sorry, between Kaldi and Baba Budan, I'm not sure which is.
The story that I read, it mentioned Baba Budhan. He's a traveler from Mecca who brought it and hid it in his beard and all.
Baba Budan is the one that brought it. I can't remember the association of Kaldi with the story, but Kaldi is also part of this. So it's a legend, but that's not the only story. The story of Robusta is different. That came from Yemen.
Robusta comes from Yemen or Arabica comes from Yemen?
Origins are still under question only. It's just a story. There's somebody who I had read somewhere that it came from Ghana also. So the origins are uh, there are multiple origin stories. They're all legends, is how we'll put it.
So we are growing coffees in 17th century.
Yes, I believe so. History is not my strongest suite.
Okay. So India has like you mentioned about GI tag for Wayanad coffee. We have 7 GI tags, right? In all.
Yes.
Yeah, and Karnataka has most of it.
Yes, so we have, I'll try to remember off the top of my head, Chikmagalur, Coorg, Annamalais, Palanis, Wayanad, and 2 Monsoon Malabars. Monsoon Malabar Arabica and Monsoon Malabar Robusta are both GI tagged. And Monsoon Malabar is not a region, it's a process.
So for those who don't know, Arabica and Robusta are like types of the bean.
Beans itself.
And what is then the names of they come from the region, like Malabar and Wayanad is the region where they grow it.
Malabar is not the region of growth, Malabar is the region of processing. Monsooned Malabar is in particular the monsooning at the Malabar coast, which means the exposure of coffee to moisture that comes from the seas. And that's just a very special process. It's a chance discovery. It wasn't something that was planned ahead. It just happened that they were in the warehouses before they could travel to the export locations. And they absorbed moisture and did not go stale. They just expanded in size with that moisture, became lighter, lost their acidity, which was something that people were liking um, in their espressos, and it's really appreciated in the Scandinavian countries.
Right.
So it got so much recognition, and the flavor becomes mellow. And these warehouses also have spices, which add spiciness. Coffee has this ability to capture the flavor of whatever surrounds it. So pepper is something that's very, very popular. In Kochi, we've seen the place where monsooning happens. It's called Aspinwall. That was the place which traditionally started doing this. These warehouses contain pepper, cinnamon, cardamom. All of these are grown in Kerala. So that's where it started. And the beans were naturals. There are 2 kinds of processing in coffee beans as well. One is where the fruit is part of the bean and the other where the fruits removed from the bean. It's called washed and naturals. Monsooning is done on naturals only. It's when the bean is on, the fruit is on the bean, the jacket's still there, still safe, and then they absorb the moisture.
And how much time does it take to get the
Three
flavor?
months.
3 months.
3 months is how much they keep it in the controlled environment. And it's about, I think it's the only one which uh, the general percentage of moisture that's allowed in dry green coffee is 9.5 to 10.5%. But in monsoon Malabar, you're allowed around 13.5%.
How do you control the moisture?
Now the warehouses come in controlled conditions and they keep moisture meters to be able to track where they are so that it doesn't go bad. But traditionally, that's not how it was done.
So let's talk about your brand Caffinary. From where are you procuring your beans?
We actually started our journey from the estates where we were working on technology for estates. But technology for estates is quite an advanced proposition considering 90% of the growers are smallholders. They have 5 acres of land and they while it is necessary for them to adapt it, it doesn't just need a solution that's given in their hands, it also needs the intent to use that solution. So while we went around the estates, we saw that there is good work that is being put in. But what happens is that let's imagine this: you're a baker, I'm a baker, and our neighbor's a baker, and all three of us sit together and bake croissants. I make mediocre croissants, you make excellent croissants, and she has learned from Le Cordon Bleu Paris, and she makes world class croissants. However, because we want to sell it in the market, and this happened till 1994, till globalization happened, um, we all give our croissants to the croissant board, and then we figure out how to we get money for per croissant. What happens is in this our croissants have become commodity. It's one croissant and we've standardized it, the croissant board has standardized it. Everybody has to make 150 grams per croissant. So then we'll all do the same sizes. Our recipes would be different, our ingredients would be different, or maybe there wouldn't be incentive to do better even when we know better, right? And that's how I see coffee was. But then once 1994 happened, a lot of people got recognition outside from consumers, but outside the country. So when export markets, which is what the major consumption is, India is not the hugest consumer of coffee. When people got a lot of recognition outside of the country, they were trying to do the best work to give their coffees out and get recognition. We've been to a grower's place who's proudly shown us Illy Coffee Awards, and they've said, this is sixth position. There 3 years in a row we've received the award. This is Zoya Estates. And we loved that. We said, why wouldn't such a thing happen in India? And if their coffee is this good, why shouldn't it go around India? So one of the first few specialty coffees that we had launched was with them. And we even had a limited edition Christmas blend. We did autumn orchards. There are different coffees that we had. But what's also important is that are people able to appreciate it? There are limited audiences that appreciate it, and then there are other audiences who would like to appreciate it.
They're curious. They don't know. They never had access to it.
So that's where both sides of the story come in. We started from the estate. We were looking at how the estates work. You ask them what is the varietal of coffee that we've grown, and they say they've been taking care of their estates for 3 to 5 generations, maybe even 7. We've met a 7th generation grower as well. So 3 generations, and they're like, my grandfather planted it. I'm not really sure what they may have planted here. I can see and tell what they've planted, but some of these look like they're hybrids. They've been planted by my grandfather in a certain way, and this is one row, and this is another, and this is a third, and they may have planned it in such a way that this one was a wider, bigger plant, and this one was a smaller plant, because that's how maybe the coffee board in that year was recommending it. because a coffee plant is 60 to 100 years old. Like that's the life of a coffee plant. So if a 100-year-old coffee plant is there, it's definitely come through three generations. And sometimes you do not have the resources to replant it. The yield might go down, but you're still thinking, I don't have the resources to cut this down and keep this land either uncultivated or plant another one here, because it takes around 7 years for a coffee plant to start bearing fruit again. So that also means that 7 years of no yield. So low yield versus no yield, what do you choose? It depends on the market conditions. So a lot of this understanding comes from being at the estate and understanding what it's like to handle an estate that is not just a garden, it's a business, which, and it is the source of income, it is the source of meals in the household. So you have to take the decision depending on how much excess you have, what the market's been like, how much you can play around, and how educations need to be taken care of. And a lot of people don't want to continue doing farming. I might want to do cultivations, but my child might want to go to the next big city. And yeah, that's what happens in major coffee estates as well. People want to travel to Mysore and Bangalore and give the reins of their estate to somebody else. So, what is the level of interest that's going from generation to generation is also questionable.
So when you say you mentioned small landholders, 5 acres. So if you look at a 5 acre farm of a coffee plantation, then how many people depend on it? If you want to count direct and indirect revenues.
A ballpark number that Coffee Board suggests should be used is you have to have 1 to 2 labor per acre. That is the labor. A family could be small or large, we're not sure. If let's say there is a 25-acre estate, I gave you the number of 5 acre, but the smallholder number is actually 5 hectares. Let's take a 5 acre number itself and run. So 5 acres, 5 members of the family, if they're there, 5 labor would also be needed, because you need to do a lot of different things throughout the year to take care of the plant and then in the end harvest. So anywhere between 1 to 2 people are needed in order to take care of that. That is the dependency level. If you're talking about even more indirectness to it, then the inputs that go into a plant would be the fertilizers or insecticides, and what else would there be? The irrigation systems. So that means probably there is somebody who's helped them set up their irrigation at some point in time. And Indian cultivation, coffee cultivation happens with intercropping, which means it's not just coffee. It's coffee with trees and it's coffee with other crops. So there are some people who choose to have 2 acres of rice and 3 acres of coffee, not just coffee, which makes sure that they have rice in the house, which is their primary consumption, primary grain of consumption, which I think is very sustainable considering they would at least have something to eat. And Black Baza Coffee is one of the sustainable brands who works on this, says we are looking at a vision of another 1,000 years. And they encourage having a plot of land which has vegetables and rice. And Arshia Bose is working towards making sure she helps growers in towards that vision. And sustainability is her prime focus. So her packaging is also paper only. That's one of the things that they do. So a 5 acre estate would primarily at least be feeding 10 people.
So profitability of coffee plantations in India is very important if you look at from that perspective as well, and from the perspective of people who are curious and want to try new varieties. So it's an up and coming market technically, right?
Absolutely.
In all ways. So when it comes to Caffinary, what is your focus? Like what is the gap in the market that you are trying to fill in with your products?
So when we saw that there was excellent work being done by the growers, which needed a lot of attention, we wanted to tell their stories to other people. So we currently focus on doing award-winning coffees. There's this culture in outside of India, especially in Panama, where some of the varietals get auctioned. So much that because they're so good that they deserve so much attention that per kg coffee goes into thousands of dollars, $13,000, $21,000 a kg. And our latest coffee obsession has been a product that comes from a grower in the Polonese. They go by the name of the natural farmer, and they focus on doing things that could probably be auctioned in some point in the future internationally. We do not consider them an estate at the Indian level. We consider them to be an estate at the international level, and they price their coffee beans also at the kind of rates that we buy international coffee beans at. So what we've tried to do with our brand is we don't just buy Indian coffees, we buy Indian coffees with international coffees, place them alongside each other, and then you can make the comparison and decide for yourself what you like better.
So when you say good coffee or something that is commanding higher price, what is something that is setting it apart from a normal coffee? How do you judge whether it's a good or bad?
Okay, this is very, very debatable. There are some ways in which there's a classification called Q grading, which is set by the Coffee Quality Institute, and the it gives coffee a score from 0 to 100. Of course, nobody gets a zero. I think the minimum starts at 60, but an 80 plus makes a coffee specialty. Now, this also depends on the different waves of coffee that have come in, but it honestly also depends on personal preferences and the journey that has been of every single consumer. I could be the kind of person who does not like acidity in their coffee, but the CQI says acidity is something that has a separate score because complexity of flavor is considered important. So it's subjective. It's like saying, I like your croissant, you like my croissant. And what do we like in it? We like it probably more buttery, less buttery, or more eggy, less eggy, or crisp or fluff. It's a choice. It's a preference. But in general, balance and complexity will give you an idea of will give you a score.
Okay. So the scoring is done internationally on a same grade, like the grade scale remains the same. I mean, if I bring a bean from Brazil versus India, I can actually use that scale and compare those two, right?
Yes, you can. Now, Brazilian coffees have different origin characteristics. They are supposed to be a certain way, and Indian coffees are supposed to be a certain way. But after the coffee is grown, and even when the coffee is grown, if a coffee is grown well, harvested well, and processed in a certain way, you can change a lot of things. Lot of different things, lot of different minute things. Like I said, naturals and washed, that's just the first step towards making coffee different.
Can you tell us the entire process of how it goes from a bean to your kitchen? What is the journey?
If you're thinking about now is when plants sort of, if they were sown now, now is when blossoms happen, rains happen, and so there will be flowers. Once flowers are there, after the flowers are, it takes about 14 days for the flowers to develop into fruit, and then it takes around 9 to 11 months for the fruit to fully ripen. And this happens again from November to February, depending on what varietal it is, when you did the flowering. Flowering is called blossoming. When the flowering happened, how the irrigation was, and what the color of your beans is. Like if you see that your bean is red in November, you'll start plucking in November. If you see your beans are red in December, that's when you start plucking. So that's how, and it depends on what elevation you're at, what shade you have, what kind of sunlight you got. And once the bean is plucked, you either dry it or wash it or process it in some other way altogether. The beans that I was talking about have gone through 4.5 months of slow fermentation afterwards. So that means it's not just 12 months of love, it's 18 months of love that went through it. It was 15 days of fermentation, and then 4.5 months of, like, 15 days of soaking and 4.5 months of slow drying, which also meant there was fermentation going on with the moisture level that was still there in the beans. So depending on what we choose to do with the beans, or the grower chooses to do with the beans, it could take close to 12 months for the bean itself to come into existence and be green. Now, what also happens is in specialty coffee, for the flavors to develop, green coffee is kept for another 3 months to age, or it's too fresh and it will taste like peanuts. It'll taste a little green, which is not something that you expect out of a good cup of coffee. A lot of Indian consumers are very discerning today and will not want to tolerate that. So that doesn't mean that if your coffee is harvested in February, you'll be able to get it till March, April, May. And even then, there's a lot of work that goes on. Now, come May, June, your rains start. And that means that if you are going to work on your coffee beans now, there is another process. So after this washing and naturals, there is a layer of either fruit or a green silver skin that's still part of the coffee that you remove only at the time when you want to roast your coffee. And that removal, if you do, the freshness of coffee sort of, it becomes more vulnerable to external conditions. So you remove the natural fruit or the skin only after you have decided that now I want it in the format that it can be roasted. So if you're doing that processing, it could be May, June, July, August, September. So you've waited for your coffee to come, like it was planted in February and it's coming to you after 18 months. It's fetching you money after 18 months from the grower's perspective. So yeah, then that's when we start roasting. And once it's roasted, it needs to be ground. Now, for the discerning Indian customer, it's ground after only before they want to drink their cup of coffee, right? For others, for a person who's drinking instant coffee, it's ground, brewed as an espresso. The soluble components are extracted and then freeze dried or agglomerated, or in whatever manner the moisture content of the coffee is removed, and then just the soluble compounds are what we use with ease in our cup of water or milk or any other mixer for that matter. Today, sky is the limit when it comes to mixers. So that's the journey for an instant coffee drinker. On the other hand, somebody who's wanting to drink an espresso will grind it as an espresso in that grind size and pull a shot. Anybody who wants to drink it as a pour over will grind it accordingly and pass it through a paper filter and make sure the solubles are to their preference.
So it's like months and months of labor to bring the precious coffee to your kitchen.
Yes.
If I hear this, I feel like coffee is much cheaper that is available. Before this podcast, I used to think coffee is very expensive. Now that you told me the amount of effort that has been put, people are generous with their pricing, I feel.
I should say the growers were facing a situation where they were underpaid for whatever effort that they were putting in, because every single coffee bean in India is not machine picked, it's hand picked by the labor. And they take care that the green beans are not plucked, the red ones are only plucked. Not the case with all. Some just pick all of their beans in one go. It's called fly picking. But there are specialty growers who make sure that they do 3 rounds of picking, which means the labor has to be paid 3 times. And just the ripest of beans comes. That's like saying making orange juice out of just the ripest oranges versus making orange juice out of everything that I got in the market. And that makes a difference. While you may or may not notice it, but given enough time, it makes a difference.
Yeah, it does. So at Caffinary, what all specialty coffees are you offering people? Is there something unique that only you are doing?
Yes, I mean, most of our coffees are exclusive. Like I talked about Couverture Canaphora, which is 4.5 months slow dried. We also have a coffee that is grown at 5,000 feet elevation, and it's called Solar Flare, and it's carbonic maceration, which means and Caffinary as a name comes from winery, and that name comes from a place where discerning coffee customers are as discerning as wine drinkers. And we're very particular about what we consume, what are the ingredients that go into the cup of coffee, or what are the flavor notes that one can taste. Yeah, I mean, not just that, I mean, even in an instant coffee, if we want flavorings added, we'd want it to be natural and wouldn't want it to taste like chemicals of course. So when it comes to specialty coffee itself, we really loved high elevation coffees, and it comes from Valparaiso, Greenland estate. And the story behind that is that only the ripe cherries are picked at such an elevation. It makes you want to huff, is how we say it. It's not a regular cup of coffee. You'll feel like you're having oranges and apricots and caramel. In fact, when I open the packet to pack it, it smells like bubble gum, a very pleasant bubble gum, you know. So that particular coffee is something that we've seen shine in a lot of different ways with an espresso or in a pour over. So those are there. Then carbonic maceration that I was talking about is done by Ratnagiri Estates, which is one of the celebrated estates of the country, and it is internationally also very popular. They have their coffees sent across the country, and it has been used in a lot of different brewing competitions also. So we used to have this product, which is now out of stock because it was limited edition. It was called Champion's Toast because the natural national barista champion was the one who used that coffee in through carbonic maceration, which comes from the wine industry, and naturals and washed that I discussed about. Both naturals and washed were separately carbonically macerated and then blended, like roasted separately and then blended. And the color of them is usually supposed to be different, but the national barista champion was an expert, and he was just able to blend it so well that it did not look like a blend. A lot of times blends are looked down upon. Single origin and single estate origin, single processing is what the norm is for specialty drinkers, but he blended it and he was able to figure out how to do something really well. And we wanted that to go to the consumers, something that's there's a lot of hard work put in by the grower and then somebody who's doing the roasting as well. It deserved a platform. So we brought that out. Now that that coffee is over, we've done something that's the successor to that, and we call it Ruby Zinfandel, which is inspired from wines again. Because the flavor notes that we get in that coffee are blueberry, mandarin, and black honey, which is something that you get in a Zinfandel also. Some really fascinating things. We're also working on a whiskey aged coffee.
Wow, very interesting.
And yes, then there are some organic coffees. Not every grower can get organic certifications, we realize. So while there are a lot of people who are growing coffee without fertilizers and insecticides and pesticides, not everybody wants to work hard towards doing the paperwork of the certification. They might not even have the size of the estate. So we cannot claim that they are doing organic work. We can see it, we believe it, but without certifications, we don't do anything. So while a lot of our coffee is grown really well and with a lot of care, the organic certified ones deserve to be getting that recognition. So we started working with Anugraha Estates 3 years back, and we have a coffee of theirs this year which tastes like jasmine, and we are working on getting that one also out.
It's amazing. So this is really interesting. This is a whole new world actually. But if you are like a normal instant coffee drinker, how do you actually transition into that world? What should be your next step? Like if you were to talk to a new person who just wants to try, is curious about different flavors, different types of roasting also, the size of the granule, how do you actually tell them, try this first, then you can transition to the next step to just make it a more memorable journey for them also?
First thing is that I'd say congratulations. You've signed up to enter into a world that's very fascinating. It's like a child entering an aquarium and looking at all the all the fishes, different fishes out there. What this also means is get ready for a lot of expenses. uh, but there are different ways of making it less expensive, is how I see it. In order to try a lot of different things, I think if you are in the center of the city, like you said, then there are a lot of community events that happen, which and most people are ready to help more than you would imagine they are. There are also a lot of different WhatsApp groups that we've also created a community called the Democratic Republic of Home Baristas, and we hold it very, very securely and very closely. It's an invite only community where we keep it very democratic in terms of asking questions to learn better. And you'd be surprised how happy people are to help in terms of learnings, because they've put in the hard work of learning, gone through that journey, and now they want to make it easier and probably bring you to the same level. Because specialty coffee is a very lonely place, we are just a limited few set of people who want to find more people like us, like-minded people, and that's what's been running communities for generations, right? We all want to feel included. And so communities is one way. Another way is to start trying. We think that it should be easy for people to try drinking coffee, so we've started with 50-gram packs. We wanted people to be able to try it in different grind sizes. And a lot of times, if you've gone across on Reddit and Discord, a lot of people would say, oh, the first investment that you'd make should be a grinder. However, we think that once you're able to try out what you really like, the investment can happen a little later. Whether or not you want to dive deep into this is a decision you have to make for yourself. Maybe you just like instant coffee with vanilla. What if you don't want to make that investment? You just like your coffee the way you like it. You, of course, brewing it fresh will give an elevated experience like no other. And adding your own vanilla gourmet essence will give you an experience like no other. But will you be able to make that plunge in the first go is hard. So that is the reason why we want to democratize things and start with like a 50-gram pack, figure it out in different grind sizes. Start with one brewing method. Today, there are a lot of affordable brewing methods. So a French press is available at 600 to 700 rupees also from IKEA. You can start with a cold brew bag and a pour over bag for 500 rupees. One cold brew bag, one pour over bag is what you can get. And 500 rupees you can get a Hario V60, which means you have two brewing methods in buying one cloth reusable cold brew bag and a V60 bag. And then you can get paper filters in 500 rupees and figure out whether you want a paper filter based brew or a cloth filter based brew. A pour over would also need a gooseneck kettle, but it's not necessary that you start from that. You can start from a regular kettle that's there in your house or from even a saucepan to begin with. I'm not saying you'll get a perfect idea, but you'll figure out whether or not you want to have that black cup of coffee, or do you want to just stick to having an espresso based coffee instead, a more concentrated, powerful cup of coffee.
So I'll have to ask you the last question now. Tell me how to be part of this community, how to reach out to you, your community.
We usually try to have a conversation before we invite anybody to the community. So oftentimes when we invite somebody, it's after they've placed a few set of orders with us, or it the person was recommended by a friend. So if you are already part of the community, you can add any of your friends because you are already part of it and you understand what it takes to uphold the community's values. Of course, we have certain rules on what should not be spoken, which is just general consensus of how civil you should be. But apart from that, we've never had any problem in terms of the kind of conversation or the quality of conversation that happens on the group. So it's just as simple as being friends with you.
So on that note, I want to thank you for coming here and just talking to the coffee nerd in me and in our viewers. You know, we all had these questions, basic questions, and you don't have to ask it when you go to, you can't ask it actually because there's also a peer pressure. You know, you look like a stupid person. You come into a cafe and you're asking, what is this? So thank you for answering all those basic questions for us and your time. I hope to have you again with more information later. So I hope you had a good experience.
Yes, yes. I'd actually like to say that if you're going into a specialty cafe and asking questions, and if you don't get your answers, that's when they need to be judged, not you. So you are entitled to all your questions, and all your answers need to be answered because they are the ones from where they are supposed to be at a place of higher knowledge. And like we are supposed to be at a place of higher knowledge, and we are supposed to transmit that knowledge. We hold that responsibility.
Thank you.
Pleasure.